Unless you have spent the last 20 or so years buried underneath a rock, you probably know about Lord of the Rings. The famous J.R.R. Tolkien series was adapted into film format in the early 2000s and was fantastic. Peter Jackson's trilogy is considered a masterpiece and maybe the greatest film trilogy of all time. It's definitely up there with Star Wars, the original Indiana Jones, and it's incredible. The Lord of the Rings is basically perfect and without flaw. So when Amazon decided to purchase the right to Tolkien's work, people had questions. So now we get a series. You can see that they've poured a ton of money into it. After all, they did spend $1 billion just on the rights to it. So I'm going to review this entire series. I'm going to go episode by episode. Right now we have the first 2 episodes of the series, and so today I'm going to talk about both of those. Let's do this. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Before we get started, click on that red subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you know whenever I post a new piece of content. Okay, so Amazon's Lord of the Rings of Power. You can tell they spent an awful lot of money on this series in an effort to get it right. And as a result, the show looks fantastic. The acting across the board is really good. There's some intriguing characters and plot lines. I am genuinely excited to see where this story goes. I really, really am. I'm going to give it the full benefit of the doubt. Tons of people have watched it and engaged with it so far. There are haters. There's always haters. I'm going to touch on some of the stuff that maybe the haters are right about, maybe they're wrong about. But I'm going to keep this largely spoiler-free and just kind of give you my thoughts on the first 2 episodes of the series. And then after this, I'll review each one week by week. So, what I like about the show I've talked about. It looks great. The acting is really, really good across the board. And I genuinely mean that on both counts. Here's where I have some concerns. We know how this story ends. That's the same, you could make the same complaint about the original trilogy, right? It's based on a book series. We know how the books end, therefore we mostly know how the movies are going to end. But here, the Lord of the Rings is like a known part of pop culture and has been for nearly 20 years. Like, we know exactly what the original Lord of the Rings is. And it's so ingrained in like the culture that we know that entire story back to back. Everyone has seen that series multiple times. We've seen the extended universe, the extended series, all of the extended films. We've seen and consumed all of it for almost 2 decades. This series is set before all of that and kind of leads into it and is going to have characters from that series that are already in this show. And so we know how it ends, right? We know Sauron's fate. Sauron is in this show. He's in the first episode of the show. We know his fate. We know the fate of the rings of power. We know the fate of the one ring that controls all the other rings. So whatever tension is there is essentially sapped right off the bat. There are major characters from the original trilogy in this show, and we know exactly what happens to them. So their fates are something I'm not concerned with because I know what happens. That is a pretty noticeable concern here. There's not a lot of tension, even in the beginning. The other issue I have is that, and this is good and bad, there are some plot threads and subplots that are awesome, and I'm really excited about. I'm excited to see what happens with Celebrimbor and Elrond as they seek to forge the rings, which it seems like that's the direction it's going. And there's some that I don't care about. There's a subplot where, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a subplot where Elrond visits the dwarves, and all of that is it's really cool, but like ultimately because we know the fate of the series and we know what happens in the Third Age, we know what's going to happen here. We know where all of this leads to, and we know the end result. And when all of your subplots aren't really as engaging as kind of the main plot is, that's a problem. The original Lord of the Rings series had incredible subplots across the board. We cared what happened to Merry and Pippin. We cared about the Ents. We cared what happened to Aragorn. We care about Elrond. We care about the hobbits. We care about Frodo's fate, and we wonder what's going to happen with Gollum. All of those things were of great concern to us. And here, there's a lot of separate plot lines that I just really don't seem to care about. And I lay some of the blame on the director. I hate Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom so much. So I wonder what Amazon is thinking when they take the director of that trash garbage pile movie and hand him the keys to the first 2 episodes of this absolutely gargantuan project that they cannot screw up. J.A. Bayona, I think he's a hack director, and like I said, I despise Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and so when I found out he was directing these 2 episodes, I was like, I guess we're going to see what happens here. He's a little part of the problem. He's not the entire problem. I think this series has some creative issues that it needs to iron out. But clearly, like, everything has been filmed and edited and it's complete. They just have to release them. So I'm wondering what's going to happen with the rest of the series. I would have liked some consistency from the directors. He's only directing the first 2 episodes, as far as I know. And then he's done and he's handing the reins off to somebody else. So we'll see if they can kind of get all those subplots into a more cohesive whole and make me care about those characters, because right now I really don't, which is disappointing. But the show looks great. The performances are rock solid, and some of the concerns people have about like the race swapping and the inclusion of characters of color for literally no reason at all, which is true. That is here. It's not super distracting. It's pretty obvious what they're trying to do. They want, and they've straight up said that they want this to look like the modern world, and they don't really care about Tolkien. And that's a massive friggin' problem. And that's reflected in some of these choices. It might be a bigger problem than people initially realize, but we'll see. They don't care about Tolkien. They don't care. They've said straight up that they want this to look like the modern world, and I don't. I want it to look like Tolkien's world, because that's what matters to me. So we'll see where it goes. I'm cautiously sort of optimistic, but yeah, I'd say I'm kind of lukewarm, but cautiously optimistic. Looks great, sound great. The production values are through the roof. I have some concerns about the direction of the story, some of the subplots, and the overall arc of the characters. But we'll see. Thank you so much for checking out the video. If you liked it, found it helpful, consider subscribing. You'd also like and share it. That'll tell the powers that be that it's worth promoting. And hit me up in the comments. Tell me I'm completely wrong about this, and this is the bee's knees, or it's complete and utter trash. And I will see you next Wednesday to review the 3rd episode of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, at 9 a.m. next Wednesday. See you then. Goodbye.